So for purposes of today's webinar, AASA is very happy to be hosting the webinar and has been very pleased with the ability to support the important work of raising awareness for the child tax credit and working with superintendents to support them in their work about raising awareness not only about that the credit exists and how it can be accessed, but in helping families access the credit as well. We know that the child tax credit as part of the American Rescue Plan is being largely credited for its work to help reduce child poverty. And while AASA doesn't posit itself as an organization committed only to reducing childhood poverty, we do absolutely commit ourselves to measures that help reduce poverty, because we know that poverty doesn't end at the schoolhouse doors, and that the impacting or compounding effects of poverty come through the classroom doors into the classroom and impact the ability of that child to be their best student. So we're excited for today's webinar, and we're going to kick things off momentarily. I do want to, though, before I kick it over to our speakers, introduce our speakers. So what we're looking at in terms of speakers today, very happy to be joined by Deb Steen. She has more than 30 years experience in policy analysis and advocacy on behalf of vulnerable children and families. Since 2014, she served as the first network director and CEO at the Partnership for America's Children. She supports the advocacy skills and organizational development of multi-issue child advocacy organizations in states and localities across the country as they pursue better policies for children in state capitals, local government, and with their federal delegation. She also co-leads the Count All Kids Census Initiative and a major child tax credit outreach campaign. She spent 8 years as a vice president of public policy at the Hatcher Group, a public affairs and communications firm, as well as 9 years with Voices for America's Children, the predecessor organization to the partnership. Debbie vigorously worked for the Food Research and Action Center and as a consultant for several national legal services organizations. She spent 6 years at Brooklyn Legal Services, where she represented indigent clients in housing matters and in obtaining public assistance. She was co-president of the New York City Legal Services Union Local and a cum laude graduate of Princeton University. Debbie also has a law degree from New York University. We're very excited to have someone with her expertise, commitment, and passion here to talk about this important work. Other speakers for today include, Dr. Almi Abeyta, Ms. Sarah Mckindrick, and Daniel Mojica. I'm sorry, I completely just left my email script. With our speakers, I will pull that back up and do that later and do justice, but to get my computer back on track, I'm going to turn it to Deb so I can fix my issue. Enjoy the webinar, and we look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much for being willing to host this webinar. We know this is a very challenging time for schools, for families, and for children. And what we want to talk about today is the school's very important role in helping families claim the credit. We've tried to make that a very easy lift for you because we know how important it is for the children and families. The project that I'm bringing to you today is a collaborative partnership between my organization, which has over 50 members, all multi-issue child advocacy organizations in 40 states, and the Coalition on Human Needs, which is an alliance of national groups whose mission it is to advocate at the federal level to meet the needs of people with low incomes. So today what I want to talk to you about is I want to give you the background on the expanded child tax credit, how families claim it, some of the common barriers and concerns we've identified, and how you as school system leaders can help families claim the credit. And then I'm going to show you how to access a resource toolkit that should make it very easy for you to do this. The opportunity that we're talking about was created under the American Rescue Plan, which did 3 important things. It expanded the amount of the child tax credit, nearly doubling it for kids under 6 and increasing it by 50% for older kids. It also made it much easier for the poorest families to get it. So for the first time, they can get the full amount of the credit, even if they had no income. So the full amount gets paid back to them. And in addition, most families were getting half of the credit paid out to them in advance and in monthly payments from July to December. But our project is primarily about reaching the families that didn't get that advance payment, and I'll talk about why. It's really important to reach those families because if we can, this expanded child tax credit can cut the number of children in poverty by about 40%, and it can lift over 1 million children out of the deepest poverty so that at least their family incomes are over half the poverty line. So what do families need to do to get that money? Because after all, we're talking about a lot of money. And so if families haven't done it already, there are some serious reasons why they were not able to do that or chose not to do that. What they need to do now is file a tax return in 2022, and that will either get them the second half of the credit if they already got some of it, or the full credit if they didn't get those advance payments. Tax season starts January 24th, so we're hoping that you can help us push out information about this over the next few weeks now that families can claim it. And families also need help understanding why they should file and where to go to get help filing their taxes. So what is the challenge? Who are these families that didn't get the advance payment and are at risk of not getting the full credit? These are families with no earned income, no income at all, or very low incomes. They are what we call non-filers. They didn't file a tax return in 2019 or 2020, and they didn't claim their economic stimulus payments. And if you think about how much attention those economic stimulus payments got and the fact that everybody knew they existed, it tells you that there are some real barriers that go beyond just knowing whether they were eligible for money that stopped them from getting the money. I want to note also that this is particularly an issue for Black and Latinx kids. They were disproportionately excluded from the child tax credit in past years, and we're afraid they're even more likely to miss out on it, even if they're eligible, unless we help them understand how to claim it. What we've learned with our efforts to get families to access the advanced credit and through our own focus groups is that schools are trusted by these non-filing families, and you can help them get the CTC. And you and your staff that are doing this work do not need to be tax experts to help them. What you need to do is tell them how to access the tax experts. Let me just lay out how much money is at stake. If we had a family with a 4-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 15-year-old, their total amount from the expanded tax credit is almost $10,000. And that's even before they get additional stimulus payments that they didn't get when they should have, or other tax credits that they'll also get when they file a return. So you can understand that for many families, we're talking about closer to $20,000. It's a huge amount. It can really make a significant difference for families during this very difficult time. Who is eligible for the child tax credit? The adult in the household doesn't need to be documented, but they do need to have a tax identification number called an ITIN if they don't have a social security number. The kids have to have social security numbers, and the kids are much more likely to do that because they were probably born in this country. The child that they're claiming the credit for has to be related to the adult. So they have to be their biological or adopted child, grandchild, stepchild. They can be the sibling or step sibling, half sibling, or descendants of any of those. They can also be a foster child placed by the government agency. They have to have lived with the adult in the US for more than half the year. So 6 months and a day will do it. And they have to be not providing their own support. The timeline that we're working with here is tax season starts in just 4 days, January 24th. And between now and at least April 18th, but often later, local volunteer income tax assistance sites are open to help people, low-income people, file their taxes at no charge to the people. And that's important because that's a really useful resource for people who are uncomfortable filing their own taxes. People who have a legal obligation to file a tax form must file by April 18th. I think in Massachusetts and one other state, it's April 19th, or they have to have asked for an extension. If they ask for an extension and they owe taxes, they're supposed to pay what they owe, but we're really talking about people who are going to get money back, so that's not an issue. But people who are not required to file taxes, and very roughly for single individuals, that's people who made less than $12,550, I think. And for married couples, it's just over $25,000. And for heads of households, I think it's just over 18. Those people don't even have to ask for an extension. They can file their tax return at any time throughout 2020 and get the tax credit back. So you can see that we want to start a big push now to get people to file, but we're going to keep pushing throughout the year. And that's important because sometime in the spring, probably April or May, the IRS is partnering with a group called Code for America to put on a simplified online filing portal for people who are not required to file taxes. So people with very low incomes, the poorest kids that we want to reach, can file with a much easier filing process that requires less documentation. And they'll get their full child tax credit if they file there, and they may also get some of the other credits. And that portal will stay open through late fall 2022. So we're going to come back to you when that portal opens and ask you to make a second push. Now, where can people go to get the help? We've listed here the best way to access it. The simplest thing is to tell everybody to go to getyourrefund.org, which has an English and a Spanish site, because that site will then guide people to the type of service that's best for them. It offers 3 options. They can do it themselves using free tax filing software, and there's some chat assistance available to guide them through it. If they want to work with a live person, they can upload their documents and do it virtually, or they can find a local Abeyta site where they can go in person. And you can go yourselves, or your staff can go to get your refund to find your local Abeyta sites also. There are other free tax assistant options out there, and I wanted to just flag 2 for you. One is the AARP Foundation site, which serves people over 50, but it also serves people with low to moderate incomes who are not over 50. And then those are all for filing taxes. The low income taxpayer clinics help people who have problems claiming their credit, not necessarily actually a dispute with the IRS. So for example, we're seeing a lot of people who have filed to get their credit, discovering someone else filed claiming the same child, and they need to get that resolved. These low income taxpayer clinics can help them with that. Again, a free service. Now, while there's a lot of free service out there, we are worried that the free tax assistance may not be available to everybody. It could be overwhelmed this year because of the pandemic. And so some families are going to choose to go to paid preparers like H&R Block or one of those. Many of those are fine. We would prefer that they didn't even have to pay for this, but we recognize that it's still well worth it given the amount of the credit. But there is a history with some of the shadier paid preparers filing inaccurate returns in order to maximize the credits. And that puts the families in a very bad position when the IRS says they have to pay back the money and pay a tax penalty. And on top of that, of course, they paid the preparer. So if people are interested in using paid preparers, we suggest that they use this guidance that I've put on the page about how to pick an honest, reputable tax preparer. Immigrants, as I said, have to have the parents. The children can have to have social security numbers. Parents can have something named ITIN. So I'm not going to walk you through this slide, but when you get the slide, you'll see there's a very specific process for how to get an ITIN, and that will take more time than just filing a tax return. We also gave you a link that you can share with families about all the materials they should bring with them when they go to a tax appointment at a Abeyta site, so that they can go in once and be prepared. I wanted to make sure that you knew that there are these other credits that when they file their full tax return, they might get, particularly people who don't use the online portal, but who file a full tax return. They include the earned income tax credit, where both the adult and the children must have a social security number. But if they have 3 children, they could get nearly $7,000. And then if they're paying for childcare and they're keeping their receipts, they can get up to $8,000 back for that for 2 children, $4,000 per child. And finally, if they've got a dependent that they can't get the child tax credit for, like a child with an ITIN, they can at least get the credit for other dependents. So again, this amount of money can really mount up, and it's worth helping families file their taxes this year. We did some focus groups to try and figure out why families didn't claim the credit. After all, they didn't claim the economic stimulus payments, which were a lot of money and had wide publicity. What were the barriers and how could we overcome those? And as you can see, we found a number of barriers. People didn't know that the child tax credit had been newly expanded. So if they weren't eligible in the past, they assumed they still weren't. They particularly believed they had to work to get the credit, and they had to file a full tax return to get the credit. They were afraid that if they claimed the credit and they were wrong, they'd have to pay the IRS back. They also were afraid that if they hadn't filed taxes in past years, they were going to be held accountable to pay back years of taxes. Many people were afraid that if they got the credit, that would count as income and they would lose other benefits like SNAP or Medicaid or WIC. And that's not true. It does not count as income for any federal benefit program. You can readily imagine there were immigration concerns, language barriers, some difficulties about the process. Our toolkits, which I'm going to show you how to access, address these barriers so that you can reach out to people and have them understand that really this is for them. Some other lessons we've learned about outreach. One is it is most effective when it's integrated into existing programs and communications. And of course, all your schools communicate regularly with the parents and children. So you have that integrated stream. It's very helpful for them to get information in their language in different ways and over multiple times. The more often they hear about it, the more likely they are to claim the credit. It's important for the outreach materials to include clear referral information on where to get help filing their tax return. And it's most effective when you do a broad campaign and then do follow-up with the families that are most likely to be missing out on the child tax credit. But anything you can do will produce a result. What else we've learned is that school districts and government benefit agencies are among the most trusted sources of information for families, and text messages from schools have been especially effective, although robocalls and other approaches can also work. And so in just a couple of minutes, I'm going to turn this webinar over to people who have specifically been doing school outreach to share with you what they did and how well it worked. But I will note that in addition to hearing from the schools, families might need to hear from tax experts or immigration experts or sometimes family law experts. And sometimes you might want to try and set up bringing that in. So I'm going to go very quickly through this, but what I want to emphasize is that in our toolkit, we have models for everything I'm giving you. So you don't have to write them or create them. You can just grab the language and use it. There's models of mass text messages, robocalls, or emails. And what I'm doing now is what we call level 1 outreach activities, which are very simple. And then I'm going to talk you quickly through level 2, where it takes more time to set it up, but it lets you go deeper with the families most at risk of missing. But level 1 includes these text messages. It can include recording a phone hold message or a video message for your waiting rooms. It can include putting posters in waiting rooms and other public spaces and sending flyers home in backpacks. Our toolkit is digital, so you would have to print these yourself. But there is an opportunity to get some of those printed, and I'll tell you in a minute how did you get that. Putting a message in a regular newsletter or posting on social media. And now we get into the level 2 activities, which are more time intensive and more staff intensive. Holding a phone bank or conducting peer-to-peer texting, bringing in a specialist to do a Q&A, helping families schedule VITA site preparations or working with your local tax sites. Maybe they can come into your school one day and do it. And also organizing document preparation events to help people get their documents ready. So here's a list of what is in our toolkits. The bare bones toolkit is available today, but we're going to be adding a lot of content as our national partners are producing more materials over the next few weeks. Very roughly, there's a lot of outreach materials. There's information on picking a tax preparer and getting ready. There's special resources for immigrant families. And then there's the best practices and lessons for child tax credit outreach. I want to note that there's also a method for tracking how many families are filing as a result of your specific activities. And I encourage you to use that. I'll talk about that again in a moment. So here are the 3 things that we are asking you to consider signing up for. The first link is our child tax credit outreach list. And that is where we'll be sending out email periodically as new outreach resources become available. If you sign up for it before Monday by using that bit.ly, on Monday, we're going to be sending out an email about how to get printed materials that show the materials you would get. So if you think you want your schools to be using flyers, you should sign up for that, and then you'll get the order form on Monday. The second link is for our toolkit, and that's what I just showed you, all of the resources that will be in there. And because it's an online toolkit, we'll just be updating it regularly. So you might want to go back and check it periodically to see what else it has. The third link in there is how to sign up to get your unique URL. So if you want to check your outcomes, if you get a unique URL for people to go to after their senior outreach materials, with that, you're actually going to be able to track how many families have chosen to claim the child tax credit because of your particular outreach. If you do that, we ask you to also email my colleague, Julia Beebe. Her email's there so that we can track it and work with you and come back. We're happy to do that. So that is my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm now going to turn the webinar over to Sarah Mckindrick. Sarah is going to do a quick overview of the project in Massachusetts called Find Your Funds, and then she's going to have some of our school members talk about what they actually do. Sarah?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm just going to get my sharing capabilities on. Just let me know if you, there we go, that should be good. Thank you again so much for having me. Like Deb said, I'm Sarah Mckindrick. I'm a project manager at the Shaw Foundation, and really excited to share today what we found to work in Massachusetts, and share all of the good work in particular that happened in Chelsea. So first off, Deb touched on a lot of this, but as a foundation, we believe that everyone should be able to access the things that they need to thrive. And so it was a natural fit that we would support access to the child tax credit and other payments that individuals could be eligible for. In Massachusetts, about 220,000 people did not get their stimulus checks, which was pretty shocking. It's a lot of money on the table that people were unable to access. And the child tax credit in Massachusetts, it was estimated that at least 58,000 kids would miss out if they did not have access to this credit. And then annually with the earned income tax credit, which is another credit that Deb mentioned, which can bring about $6,600 if you're a family with 3 kids. 22% of people did not claim that. And so again, this is thousands of dollars on the table, and that's kind of the messaging that we are leading with here in Massachusetts. So we actually developed a website called findyourfunds.org. With our partners listed here. They're the tax experts across our state. And the goal is to really connect with people who don't usually file taxes, so those non-filers, and provide them with really simple information on what they could get, how they could get it, and where. And we kept this website up to date. There's a ton of really good FAQs. If you have specific questions, you're welcome to dig into it. A lot of the information is applicable nationally. Some of it is specific to Massachusetts, but again, a lot of it is relevant probably to your district. So check it out. The website is available in 6 different languages. And we provided, much like what the partnership and the coalition is doing, an outreach toolkit in 11 languages. And I think our materials are a part of that. So definitely encourage folks to use those resources that are already available to them. One really key component of our outreach in our state was schools. We know that schools are the most trusted source of information for the families who might be eligible and might be missing out on this money. And we had a lot of success in working with districts. I think I worked with upwards of 20 districts in our state, and then a number of others were really amazing in terms of getting the word out about these resources. And in particular, Chelsea Public Schools was incredible, and so I'm really grateful to have them today. So I'll turn it over to Superintendent Abeyta, and then also Daniel Mojica, who is the director of the Parent Information Center in Chelsea. And just feel free to hit or tell me next slide, and I can switch over for you.
Thank you, Sarah. It's great to be here. I am the superintendent of Chelsea Public Schools. We're just right outside of Boston. And so we are a school district with about 6,000 students, pre-K through 12. 83% of our students are first language is not English. We have 85.8% high needs, and 70.6% of our students are economically disadvantaged. So during this pandemic, we really had to focus on family engagement. It became very apparent to us that it was critically important for us to really reach out to our families. And then part of our strategic plan, one of our we have 5 strategic priorities, and one of our pillars is really to engage families and community organizations in shared decision making. And so during the pandemic, we were in remote learning for the entire year and a half of the beginning of this pandemic. And so we really recognized the need to develop relationships with our families, and how we did that needed to be different than pre-pandemic. So we worked on building trust with our families. We knew that, and to engage our families in remote learning, we need to build relationships. And so we did a lot of outreach during the time when it was safe to be out and about during the pandemic in the summer. We connected with families. And so that was a huge push. And so we really focused on just how do we, now that we're in the living rooms and bedrooms in our students' homes, let's really engage mom, dad, guardians, whoever was there in education. And so we also had to figure out new ways to communicate to families because students were not in schools. And so I was fortunate to have a Harvard intern who was deeply invested in family and community engagement. And he came to me and said, Almi, why don't we try texting families, and I can set it up. And we were doing surveys during the pandemic, trying to get information out to families. So he created, he pushed us to really engage our families through the mobile phone. And it was the phone and the texting. And immediately we got immediate responses from those text messages. And that's how we have communicated this entire pandemic, whether it's Chromebook distribution, whether it was vaccinations, whether it was this. So I say that because we had the right things and systems in place already as a result of the work that we had done early in the pandemic. And so we had what I would say deep trust with our families, and we even would meet families on the sidewalks, give them materials, and we called those trust visits. And the foundation was we are coming alongside our families and building relationships with our families because families are our partners. And so as a result of that, when this came about, we wanted to make sure that our students and families knew about the child tax credit and any missed stimulus payments. So this was extremely important to us. First, because this is a lot of money that can have a huge impact on our families. And our families, we were the hardest hit city in Massachusetts by COVID. So this was extremely important to us. Many of our families have lost income. They had suffered hardship due to COVID. There was potentially thousands of dollars for individuals to access. And we wanted to make sure that anyone who was eligible could receive the funding. And we also knew that at least 650 children in Chelsea would miss out on this money if they didn't sign up. And this is according to IRS data. And so this became extremely important to us. And second, we also knew, and I say this always to our city manager and throughout this pandemic, is that the schools are the most trusted resources of information in our city. And given our population, many who are immigrants and have major distrust of our government, misinformation can spread, and schools, we can have a high impact on getting the right information at the right time. And so I really encourage my city leaders to say, I've encouraged them to please come to us. We will get information out, whether it's about the child's tax credit, whether it's about vaccinations, because again, schools are trusted. And so despite the schools not having tax knowledge, schools can have a huge influence and be the messenger and the connector to resources. And so what I'm going to do now is I'll introduce you to Daniel Mojica. He's our director of our Parent Information Center. He and his staff are on the ground. And so I'm turning it over to our wonderful director, Daniel Mojica.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abeyta. Thank you to the Coalition on Human Needs and ASA for this presentation. So Dr. Abeyta hit the nail on the head. Chelsea was it's a community that suffered a lot through COVID. So when Sarah reached out with this opportunity to get this word out on all this money that our families have access to or are entitled to, I jumped on it with approval of central office to kind of get the ball rolling, reaching out to my staff, letting them know that this is the next steps that we're going to do, and this is how we're going to go ahead and direct the calls that are coming into our office, because a lot of people, a lot of families, it's trusting the community leaders, trusting Chelsea Public Schools. So what we did was we used the resources provided that Sarah provided. Text messaging works very well for our families. A lot of our families work in locations where they don't have access to their phone immediately, and they miss our calls, and those lengthy messages sometimes just don't work for our families. So text messaging, they get to see it once they come out, either on break or after work, and they can go ahead and keep that on their phone and get back to it a little later. So we did send a text out to over 6,000 students to direct them to the Greater Boston Legal Services, which is an agency in Boston who offers great support for our families. That's something that Sarah and the Shaw Foundation had set up. So that resource was there. The key thing, what I find helpful, is to send out the initial text and do a follow-up text right before the day of an event, which kind of reminds parents, oh yeah, I had that on my calendar. It's great that they did remind me. Social media is also a great outlet. Sarah provided all the materials. We just posted on social media with the materials provided. We Chelsea-fied it so that it kind of talks to our families. And so social media, phone calls. Our families don't have a lot of email, but we do have those families that email is the best access for them. So we did all communication outlets. Another thing in Chelsea, it's a 1.8 by 2 square mile city. So word of mouth. We pass that along. They come to my office. We let them know what's happening, and it spreads like wildfire throughout the city. So building trust, informing community organizations of what's happening, and where to direct the parents are the key elements that made this such a successful project for the Shaw Foundation and to find your funds. So the items that did work: social media, text messaging was very key, phone calls, and word of mouth. Use the resources provided. Sarah provided some great resources. Local agencies, La Colaborativa, who made a big impact during the COVID, the pandemic. They were holding informational sessions so that parents can go there and just kind of find out a little bit more, and where they can get the ITIN numbers and so on. And that's the work that we did here in Chelsea. I think that that it was a great run, and we're going to continue working off of that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Superintendent, I wasn't sure if you had anything to add.
I will just say our staff worked in tandem with Sarah, and Sarah was our biggest cheerleader to really support us through this work. And so we were excited, and we were so fortunate to have a partner and to really help us and guide this work. And I think a lot of people, and I just said this to someone today, it's like, we do this, and I'm not the expert. Schools are not the expert, but we can point people in the right direction and to the resources. And so that's what we do. And we continue to do that in the middle of this pandemic. And the systems that we built will continue to use and learn from that. And again, we're happy to share whatever we've learned if anyone wants to reach out.
Thank you so much. And I think some of these things have already been touched on, and thank you to everyone at Chelsea Public Schools for getting the word out. I recognize that this is a really crazy time right now, and so we're just really grateful for everything that you did, because it worked. With every text, not every text, but with a good portion of the text, Greater Boston Legal Services got a phone call asking for help. And as a result, a lot of families were connected to these benefits. So here I just kind of pulled our high level recommendations for families or for schools based on the work in Chelsea and kind of across our state. So obviously communicate in ways that work best for your family. You know your school community better than us, but if you have access to texting, it is incredibly effective. If not, email and social or other methods work too. And Deb mentioned this earlier, but in some cases, a couple districts hosted Facebook Lives, and they did that with a tax expert. So again, getting the idea of you don't have to be the tax expert, but you can be the conduit. And I think a superintendent and a local Abeyta site hosted a virtual event. And so the school is able to bring the attendees virtually, and then we were able to kind of answer questions live via Facebook, which really tended to work in that community. Like Daniel said, send out the messages more than once. Use really simple messaging. So I think the language provided in the toolkit from the coalition will have lots of good simple material for you to access, obviously in multiple languages. And our biggest recommendation too is to include a phone number or a direct link for help. So if you have a local tax site, and in Chelsea, we touch base with Greater Boston Legal Services because they can help on taxes and then also help with ITINs, which we know is a huge need. So we were able to, directly put their phone number in the text message, and as a result, GBL has got a bunch of phone calls, and they were able to kind of triage from there. So if you have a site near you that offers free in-person tax support or ITINs, highly recommend that you include that phone number in the text message. And I think that's it on our end. So thank you so much.
Deb, you're still muted.
So Sarah, did you have anything else you wanted to add, or are we ready to move on for questions?
I think that was it on our end. Thank you.
Okay. So we've been asking for you to put questions in the chat, and I'm going to kick us off by answering the one about who will be eligible for the Simplified portal opening later in the spring. The Simplified portal under current law is only available to people who are not legally required to file taxes. That is not, it can be people who had work income under the amounts I gave before. So, $25,000 for a married couple or less, they don't have to file. As a single parent, it's $12,500 or less. That's not exactly right, but that's about right. And for a single head of household, around $18,000. But it can also include disabled people whose income from Social Security, when added to their earned income or their other income, is less. There's a formula. It's half your Social Security plus the other income is under $25,000. So a lot of elderly and disabled people are not legally required to file, not just people who are out of work in 2021. And many of those people have not been required to file in the past and assume that they are not eligible for the tax credit and don't have to file. So it's important to encourage like grandparents raising grandchildren to file, even if they may not legally be required to, because they could get the tax credit, or a disabled parent, as well as people who just have been unemployed during the pandemic. The slides will be available the folks at AASA are going to be circulating them to everybody as well, I believe, as a recording. Christina Davila asked whether there are resources available to help families get ITINs. And my colleague Julia dropped in the chat our toolkit link, which was also on my slides. And in the toolkit, there is a whole section on resources for immigrant families that includes how to get an ITIN. Now, a lot of immigrants already have ITINs. Millions of immigrants file tax forms every year using an ITIN, and they know that this is a safe process and their information isn't going to be given to the Office of Homeland Security or ICE. But and for those families, it's very simple. They can file online, they file their tax return, they don't have any special steps. The people who have a special step are the ones who have never gotten an ITIN, and that's what we spell out in our toolkit. Sorry, I'm trying to scroll down in the chat to see what the other questions were. So Luciana said, did you find certain strategies or messages more responsive across school groups? And she's particularly asking about parents of elementary or middle or high school students. And I don't know who wants to take that.
I can take that. What we discovered was that texting across the board was most effective. So if we had information that needs to go out, except for example, survey, we would we'd blitz it out to all of our families, and right away within the first hour, we would get about 1,000 responses. And so it is the quickest way to reach families. So we would do that from central office. And then we can do a lot of follow-up at the individual schools as well, and communication at the school level. So there's central office level. And then we would, if we need more of a push, we would ask principals to push this out as well. And then as Daniel shared earlier, sending reminder texts is really helpful. So that is the most effective. So follow up with the text as well as the original text from several days ago, then another follow up.
Great. Were there certain questions that people asked over and over again that people might want to include specifically in their
I'll let
to start with?
Yeah, I'll let Daniel answer that one. He would know more about that than me.
Sorry, Deb, specific questions in what sense? Like, is this real? Is this
That's what I'm wondering. Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you getting questions about, is it real? Were you getting questions about where do I get help filing? What kind
Absolutely. Yes. So a lot of people weren't even aware, as Sarah had mentioned, that, and you as well, that they were eligible for the CTC. So with us sending out that information, it kind of threw the rod out there to the lake to get them to bite. And when they came in, and we can direct them to an agency like the Greater Boston Legal Services or La Colaborativa for an informational session, they were like, okay, this is something that I'm going to look into, because those are two reputable agencies that we have relationships with, the Chelsea Public Schools. So I think that's if it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. But this here, parents kind of, they trusted us, and they were asking us, and they know that we're here for their best interest. So so when we directed them, the person over at Greater Boston Legal Services, she was getting a ton of calls, which is, it's good for the families. It's good for everybody. It's a win-win for everybody. So yeah, so they just wanted to see if it was real. But we got to keep on making this push out to the families, because we have a lot of new families coming into the city who may not be aware of what could be offered to them. So that's my job, and the job of my staff as well.
Great. So we have a question here from Lillian, and it's actually two questions. The first one is, as a school superintendent, are there any special nuggets you use to encourage your principals who are already stretched so thin to engage in this kind of outreach?
Special nuggets. I don't have any special nuggets except for family engagement is one of 5 pillars in the strategic plan that we just rolled out. And so it's a key part of the work that we are doing in Chelsea Public Schools. So really that's foundational for us. So there was no special nuggets, just this is foundation, part of our foundation, part of the one of 5 areas that we're really focused on, because to us, family engagement is about equity. And so it reaching out and letting our families know that we're here to partner with you. We come alongside you. You are the expert with your student and not necessarily us all the time. And we are here. We value all that you bring to the table, equity focused, and we're doing family engagement that's more co-designed with families and not to families. So really it's at the heart and the essence of what we're doing in Chelsea Public Schools as a pillar to really engage families. So we had done a lot of professional development about why family engagement is so important prior to this. So the foundation was there, but fortunately, no special nuggets, but just part of what we do in Chelsea Public Schools. And then there's the other question I can let Daniel and Sarah answer about the need to hire additional staff.
So on our end, Dr. Abeyta, she did a great job with emphasizing the importance of family engagement. We do have family liaisons in our schools, so they helped a ton with getting this message out as well. The principals are on board with having families as our partners. So we didn't have to, fortunately, we didn't have to hire anybody. All the pieces were already in place. We just kind of continue to push that message out to the community.
And just to add to what Daniel said, from Greater Boston Legal Services side, it was really about making the connection. So they had reached out to me to say, you know, we're having trouble like reaching families about the CTC. And I know there's so many families. And that's where I was like, well, have you connected with Chelsea Public Schools? Because I'm sure they can get you some phone calls. And the next day she had 300 phone calls. So, you know, I think it's just that kind of like community connection that was already there, and just facilitating those connections and getting people the help they need.
Great. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but I do have questions for you guys. My biggest one is, what are you planning now for the start of tax season that other people might want to think about and share? I don't know if any of you want to grab that.
I can start, and then everybody else. So what we're planning is we'll continue our partnership with Sarah and continue the good work that we've started and build upon that. So we're just looking forward to getting more information out. And again, I always say I am not an expert in this, but we are experts in communicating things out and getting word out and connecting our families to services. And that is important to us. So we'll just continue to focus on that.
And then from working with other districts as well, and Daniel, you might have some things to add. We're encouraging them also to kind of do the same thing and using Chelsea as a model. So if they have access to texting and all of those things, we will be, you know, utilizing the toolkit that is available, that's updated, but kind of just doing the same things that worked. I might try to see, it's just really hard as everyone's so stretched right now. If there is a possibility of kind of increasing the number of Facebook Lives that we do, because we do know those were successful in some areas. So it's kind of working with every school community to see what works best in engaging. I know some folks are thinking about in-person events. If there's something already happening, maybe you can invite your local free tax preparation site to come and talk to families. So any kind of like connecting, but I think moving to this year, we're going to also really look at using texting more frequently and connecting to local Abeyta sites, because now many more are open than were open in the fall.
Yes, I think that's right. And just using the local agencies in your city or town that are already doing a lot of good work, but just kind of letting them know what else is out there. And some families go to one agency, others go to others. So we need to have all the same information across the board.
I do want to remind all of our audience that if you can connect with your local groups that are doing tax prep, that is undoubtedly best. But if you can't, then sending everybody to getyourrefund.org, which maybe my colleague Julia will pop in the chat again, and that has an English and a Spanish website, and they'll make the connections for people either to the free tax software or to meeting with an Abeyta person online or to doing it in person. And so, even that piece of the process, we've tried to make as easy for you as possible. So here we go. There's the Get Your Refund link where you can get people connected to the local Abeyta sites. And it's available in English and Spanish. I do also want to mention, as I said, our basic toolkit is up now. We have several national partners that are producing more materials, and in particular, we're going to be putting up another flyer and I think social media next Monday. And then at the first week in February, we'll have a lot more text materials. And shortly after that, we'll have a lot more languages for the materials that are already up there. So if you want to do this and you're looking for materials in other languages, by all means, check back. We understand that some of these are being produced in 6 or 7 or 10 languages. And I think that is a really important and useful feature, because we do know that immigrant families are some of the biggest groups of these non-filers who assumed they weren't eligible and need to hear that they can claim this credit. I'm not seeing any other questions. Do any of my colleagues want to make any final comments before we turn this back to Noelle to wrap this up? No? Okay. Noelle, if you want to close this out, I want to thank you for hosting this webinar and creating this opportunity for schools during what we know is a really hard time for schools. But I know we all care about these children and their families, and this is a great opportunity. And so anything you can do to connect them is wonderful.
And all I can do is say thank you. This is excellent information that we don't have the technical experience or bandwidth with internally. So the ability to partner with good outside collaborators and content experts is a huge benefit to our members. And we really appreciate you taking the time to share your boots on the ground perspective and experience in helping to raise awareness and spread the word on the important work of the child tax credit. So again, I want to thank all of our presenters today, Sarah, Dr. Almi, Superintendent Mojica, and then Deb, and then for all the people behind the scenes making our webinar possible. As a reminder, today's webinar has been recorded, and we'll be sharing all of the webinar slides as well as links that were dropped into the chat with all conference or webinar attendees or registrants. And so that information will be coming to you within the next day or two. So thank you. That concludes today's webinar. Stay healthy and stay well and keep up the great work. Have a good day.